In the summer of 1940, as the German war machine swept across Europe, Britain stood alone, battered, defiant, and uncertain of survival. The fall of France had left the British Isles as the final bastion against Nazi domination. In the smoky halls of Whitehall, Prime Minister Winston Churchill sought a new weapon, one that could strike back not with numbers or firepower, but with precision, audacity, and fear. "Set Europe ablaze," he ordered. From that command, a new breed of soldier was born, the British Commandos. Their purpose was simple yet revolutionary: to carry the war to the enemy's doorstep, even while Britain licked its wounds. The idea had roots in irregular warfare from the Boer War, where small, fast-moving units harassed larger armies with stealth and cunning. Now, Churchill envisioned an elite force capable of amphibious assaults, sabotage, and intelligence gathering. The Combined Operations Headquarters, established under Admiral Sir Roger Keyes in 1940 and later commanded by Lord Louis Mountbatten, became the nerve center for these unconventional missions. Their motto, "United we conquer." The first volunteers were drawn from every branch of the armed forces, soldiers, sailors, and airmen alike. Many were restless after the evacuation of Dunkirk, driven by a burning need to fight back. Their training, held at Achnacarry Castle in the Scottish Highlands, was brutal. Recruits endured forced marches through freezing rivers, live-fire exercises, and cliff assaults in the dead of night. One veteran later recalled, "You didn't just learn to fight, you learned to disappear." It was warfare stripped of comfort and convention. As Britain prepared its defenses against an expected German invasion, the Commandos were quietly deployed to probe enemy-held coasts. Their early missions were experiments, small-scale raids testing not only tactics but courage itself. Operation Collar in June 1940 marked their debut. Crossing the English Channel in flimsy motorboats, a handful of men landed near Boulogne and Le Touquet. The results were modest: a few prisoners taken, a few German installations destroyed, but the psychological impact was immense. The British were striking back. Within weeks, reports filtered back to London. The Germans had been caught off guard, forced to divert troops and fortify hundreds of miles of coastline. For Churchill, this was proof of concept. These were not mere raids. They were messages, reminders that the war was far from over. The Prime Minister's fascination with commando warfare grew. He ordered the creation of more specialized units, each trained in sabotage, demolition, and intelligence extraction. Among these, No. 3 and No. 4 Commandos became legends in the making. They operated under cover of darkness, slipping across the channel to plant explosives, ambush patrols, and gather intelligence on German movements. Every mission demanded silence and speed. A single misstep could doom them all. Yet the men thrived on danger. As one officer wrote in his diary, "The thrill is not in killing but in outwitting. To strike unseen and vanish before the echo fades." Behind their daring, however, lay deep strategic purpose. The raids were never just about destruction. They were reconnaissance in disguise. Each operation fed crucial intelligence to Britain's rapidly expanding espionage network, MI6, the SOE, and Bletchley Park. The Commandos became the human link between the battlefront and the secret war of codes and deception. Still, secrecy came at a price. Families often received no word of their sons' whereabouts. Missions that failed were erased from official records. The men lived in shadows, celebrated only in whispers. Some operations were so secret that even the participants knew only fragments of the plan. "We were told only what we needed to know," recalled Corporal James Leah of No. 4 Commando. "You asked no questions. You trusted the man beside you and hoped he'd still be there when dawn came." As 1941 dawned, the Commandos were ready for something larger, a full-scale assault that would test every lesson learned from their early experiments. The target would be in Norway, a land occupied by German forces and vital to the Reich's war industry. Fish oil from Norway's coastal factories provided the glycerin for explosives, and its ports served as bases for U-boats and iron ore shipments from Sweden. The mission, codenamed Operation Claymore, would strike the Lofoten Islands, far beyond the reach of most Allied forces, deep inside enemy-held waters. The objective: destroy the factories, capture prisoners, and, if possible, bring back intelligence of value to British codebreakers. It was to be one of the first major commando raids of the war, and it would yield secrets that would change the course of history. Yet few knew what awaited them beyond the Arctic horizon, nor that among the papers and machines they'd recover, hidden within crates of fish oil and factory ledgers, lay clues to a German code system so complex that it had baffled Allied cryptographers for months. The Commandos would soon uncover something far greater than they were sent to find. And in doing so, They would ignite a new chapter in the secret war of intelligence, one where silence and secrecy became the most dangerous weapons of all. March 4, 1941, dawn broke over the icy fjords of northern Norway, where the sea met jagged peaks dusted in snow. The Lofoten Islands, 150 miles north of the Arctic Circle, lay silent under German occupation. Few outside the highest circles of British command knew what was coming. The operation had been planned in absolute secrecy under the codename Claymore, the first large-scale strike by the newly formed British Commandos. Its purpose: to cripple German industry, test Britain's amphibious warfare doctrine, and, perhaps, gather any fragments of intelligence left behind in the wreckage. 4 destroyers of the Royal Navy, HMS Somali, Bedouin, Tartar, and Eskimo, carried nearly 500 men from No. 3 and No. 4 Commando, along with Norwegian volunteers eager to strike back at the occupiers. They departed from Scapa Flow under cover of darkness, slipping northward through treacherous seas. Their orders came directly from the Combined Operations Headquarters: destroy the fish oil factories and storage tanks that supplied glycerin for German explosives, sink enemy shipping, and seize any intelligence materials. The raid would last no longer than a few hours. Speed was everything. As they approached the islands near dawn, the commandos prepared for silence and precision. Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater, commanding officer of No. 3 Commando, briefed his men on the deck, the freezing wind cutting through their wool uniforms. "Remember," he said, "we are here to remind them that nowhere in Hitler's Europe is safe." Minutes later, landing craft churned through the icy surf, their hulls scraping against stony beaches. What followed was a display of calculated chaos. Within minutes of landing, the commandos fanned out across Stamsund, Henningsvær, and Svolvær. Explosives tore through processing plants, fuel tanks erupted in fire, and the air filled with the stench of burning oil. German resistance was minimal. The garrison had been caught completely off guard. Factory workers, many of them Norwegians under forced labor, watched as the Union Jack fluttered briefly over the harbor before being withdrawn. Then came the unexpected find. Inside a German trawler moored in Svolvær harbor, a small team led by Captain Martin Ling, a Norwegian actor turned commando, discovered several Enigma machine components and codebooks. These were not their intended targets. The men barely understood the significance of what they held. But the documents were labeled Geheim, secret, and packed aboard HMS Somali before the retreat. What seemed like routine spoils would soon become one of the most valuable intelligence hauls of the war. Back in London, when the materials reached the cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park, they were met with disbelief. Alan Turing's team, already working frantically to break the German naval enigma, suddenly had authentic keys, rotor settings, and indicator tables that allowed them to decode intercepted U-boat transmissions. The Claymore raid had, without realizing it, unlocked part of Germany's most secure communication network. One officer later wrote in a classified memo, "From the ashes of a fish factory came the lifeline of the Atlantic." The immediate results of the raid were just as tangible. 11 German ships were sunk, 18,000 tons of oil destroyed, and over 225 prisoners taken. More than 300 Norwegian volunteers joined the Allies as a result, fleeing aboard the British destroyers. For morale it was a triumph. For Churchill, it was vindication. His faith in the commandos had been rewarded. The raid proved that Britain could still strike hard and far, even while the Luftwaffe bombed its cities nightly. But beneath the triumph, questions lingered. German intelligence, humiliated by the attack, launched an inquiry into how such a large force had reached their shores unnoticed. Some reports hinted at sympathetic Norwegian informants feeding information to the British. Others whispered of coded messages transmitted from fishing boats. No one ever confirmed how the commandos navigated the labyrinth of fjords so precisely without detection. Even decades later, certain details of Operation Claymore remain curiously absent from official archives. Some debriefing files, particularly those relating to the intelligence recovered, were marked for restricted access well into the 1970s. It is now believed that Claymore's success set the precedent for a series of more daring missions, blending espionage, deception, and direct assault. It also tightened the veil of secrecy around Britain's intelligence war, where even victories had to be hidden. As HMS Tartar and her sister ships withdrew from the Lofoten coast that evening, flames still illuminated the horizon, a scar of defiance carved into occupied Norway. The commandos returned home to quiet applause, their names unmentioned in newspapers. Officially, it was just another raid. Unofficially, it had altered the balance of intelligence in the Battle of the Atlantic. And yet, for all its precision and success, Claymore was only a beginning, a test run for operations that would demand even greater courage and sacrifice. The lessons learned in Norway would soon be applied to a mission that bordered on the impossible: to strike deep into France, where the Germans guarded one of their most prized naval assets. That mission would not end with the same clarity, and many of those who volunteered would never return to tell what happened when the Commandos went to Saint Nazaire. March 28, 1942. The port of Saint Nazaire, on the Loire River estuary of western France, slept beneath a blanket of fog and moonlight. To the Germans, it was a fortress, the home of the Normandy dry dock, the only facility on the Atlantic coast capable of servicing the Kriegsmarine's largest warships, including the feared battleship Tirpitz. Destroying that dock would mean crippling the German surface fleet. But it seemed untouchable, buried deep in occupied territory and defended by more than 5,000 troops, anti-aircraft guns and shore batteries. To Churchill's newly empowered Combined Operations Headquarters, that challenge was precisely why it had to be done. The mission was codenamed Operation Chariot. The plan: send an obsolete destroyer packed with explosives straight into the dock gates, detonating it from within, a suicide strike executed by men who knew they might never come home. The ship chosen was HMS Campbellton, an aging American Lend-Lease destroyer, stripped down, armored, and modified to resemble a German Mauclass torpedo boat. Her bow was reinforced with layers of steel and filled with 24 depth charges, timed to detonate hours after impact. Alongside her, 18 small motor launches and motor gunboats would carry 265 commandos of No. 2 Commando and supporting Royal Navy personnel. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman, a cool-headed engineer turned commando officer, known for his calm resolve. "We go to strike a blow so hard they'll feel it in Berlin," he told his men before departure. At 2200 hours on March 27th, the flotilla slipped from Falmouth Harbor under radio silence, escorted by destroyers HMS Tyndale and Atherstone. The night sea was rough and cold, the crews packed tight on wooden decks slick with spray. Many carried personal letters sealed in waterproof bags, to be opened only if they failed to return. As they approached the French coast in the early hours of March 28th, German searchlights swept the river mouth. The element of surprise hung by a thread. To confuse enemy watchers, Campbellton raised a German naval ensign and transmitted counterfeit recognition signals stolen from earlier intelligence raids. For precious minutes, it worked. German gunners hesitated, unsure if the oncoming flotilla was friendly. Then at 1:22 the deception broke. Tracer fire erupted from both banks, tearing across the river like molten rain. The commandos pressed on. Under a hail of gunfire, Campbellton charged forward at 19 knots. Her bridge was shredded, crewmen cut down at their posts, but her engines held. At 1:34 she slammed into the dock gates exactly as planned, a thunderous collision that sent steel twisting and water surging through the basin. The bow crumpled but held fast, embedding the ship deep into the caisson. The commandos leapt ashore, racing to plant demolition charges on pumping houses, electrical substations and dry dock machinery. For nearly 20 minutes, close quarters fighting raged through the dockyard. Sergeant Major Thomas Durrant manned his Lewis gun until he fell, mortally wounded. Lieutenant Colonel Newman, moving between demolition teams, directed the withdrawal while fires spread across the harbor. One team destroyed the pumping machinery so completely that the dock would be useless for the remainder of the war. When the retreat signal was given, the situation had turned desperate. Many of the motor launches sent to extract the raiders were destroyed or burning. Ammunition was nearly gone. Some men attempted to swim the Loire. Others were captured trying to reach the countryside. Campbellton remained lodged against the gates, silent, a steel Trojan horse waiting to strike. By morning, 169 commandos and sailors were either dead or prisoners. German officers toured the wreckage, curious about the strange destroyer that had rammed their prized dock. Believing it to be harmless, they allowed soldiers and French civilians to climb aboard to inspect it. Hours passed. Then at 10:35 a.m., the depth charges hidden in her bow detonated. The blast ripped through the dock, killing over 300 Germans and obliterating the caisson gates. A column of smoke and debris rose hundreds of feet into the sky, the explosion so powerful it was heard 30 miles away. The Normandy dock was destroyed beyond repair. Churchill called it the greatest raid of all. Hitler, in fury, ordered that captured commandos be executed under his infamous Commando order, a brutal directive that condemned many to concentration camps rather than POW status. Only a fraction of the original raiding party made it back to England. Lieutenant Colonel Newman was captured but survived captivity, later awarded the Victoria Cross for his leadership. The strategic impact was immense. The Tirpitz never risked the Atlantic again. Her operations were confined to the Norwegian fjords, constantly hunted by the RAF and Royal Navy until her sinking in 1944. The Street Nazir raid demonstrated that precision, deception, and raw courage could achieve what entire fleets could not. Yet behind the glory, mysteries persisted. Some eyewitnesses claimed they saw a small detachment vanish inland with sealed satchels, allegedly containing captured German plans and codebooks. None of those men were ever found, and their names were quietly omitted from debrief reports. To this day, fragments of classified correspondence hint that Chariot's true objectives went beyond demolition, perhaps into the shadow war of intelligence that linked Churchill's commandos to Bletchley Park and the Secret Intelligence Service. As survivors limped into captivity or rescue ships, one thing was certain: Britain's secret war had entered a new phase. The commandos had proven their worth and their methods beyond question. But even as London celebrated the success at St. Nazaire, another series of raids was already being drawn on the maps of combined operations, this time across Norway's icy coastline. The next missions would combine sabotage with deception, and not all would return from the frozen north. By the winter of 1942, the commandos had become a weapon Churchill could wield with surgical precision, striking at will, vanishing into fog, and leaving only wreckage and confusion behind. Yet for all their success, the Germans remained unbroken along the coasts of occupied Norway. The fjords still served as safe harbors for U-boats and the mighty Tirpitz, now hiding in the northern reaches at Altenfjord. To draw the enemy's attention away from Allied plans elsewhere, two more covert operations were conceived: Operation Anklet and Operation Archery, twin raids designed to deceive, destroy, and disappear without a trace. Both missions were part of a broader campaign to make the Germans believe that the Allies were preparing a full-scale invasion of Norway. The deception had to feel real. Simultaneous strikes, radio chatter, and visible ship movements would convince Berlin that the Arctic coast was under threat. In truth, the operations were meant to buy time, a smokescreen to hide the growing Allied interest in North Africa and to keep the Tirpitz pinned in place, far from the Atlantic shipping lanes. Operation Anklet was the smaller of the two, executed over Christmas week, 1941, on the Lofoten Islands. The same icy archipelago where Operation Claymore had struck earlier in the year now saw the return of No. 12 Commando, ferried by Royal Navy ships under Arctic twilight. Their orders were clear: raid German outposts, seize communications equipment, and sow as much disruption as possible. Snow fell thick as the men landed, muffling every step. They struck hard and fast, storming German barracks, destroying radio transmitters, and cutting telephone lines. The commandos captured several prisoners and retrieved valuable documents detailing coastal defenses. But before dawn, a sudden storm forced their withdrawal. The German response was chaotic. Reports of large Allied landings reached headquarters in Oslo, prompting entire divisions to redeploy northward. The deception was working, even as the commandos slipped quietly back to sea, leaving behind only smoldering ruins and unanswered questions. Days later, as Anklet's echoes still rippled through the German command network, Operation Archery commenced. This time, the target was Vagsøy, a heavily fortified island near the Norwegian town of Maløy, a key node in Germany's shipping route between Trondheim and Bergen. On December 27, 1941, at precisely 9 o'clock, the Royal Navy's guns opened fire. Shells screamed across the harbor as landing craft surged toward the beaches carrying No. 3 Commando, a small detachment of No. 2 and Norwegian troops trained in exile. The resistance was fierce. German machine guns raked the landing zones from hidden bunkers, cutting through the icy air. Smoke grenades choked the streets as commandos fought from house to house, clearing snipers and setting demolition charges in warehouses stocked with fuel and ammunition. Overhead, aircraft from RAF Coastal Command strafed German positions, their engines echoing across the fjord. It was like fighting inside a furnace, one veteran recalled. Everywhere was smoke, fire, and shouting in two languages. Amid the chaos, a crucial secondary objective unfolded: the seizure of German shipping manifests and signal books. Intelligence officers attached to the raid scoured the harbor offices and a local Gestapo headquarters, collecting anything that might aid Allied codebreakers. These papers, recovered under fire and soaked in seawater, would later confirm convoy routes and hint at U-boat operations further north. By noon, the commandos had achieved their objectives, but at heavy cost. The withdrawal to the landing craft was under constant sniper fire, and several boats were lost. Of the roughly 570 men who took part, 17 were killed and over 50 wounded. Yet the destruction was immense. 4 merchant ships sunk, the town's industrial facilities leveled, and a German garrison nearly annihilated. The psychological effect was even greater. Hitler was incensed, convinced that Norway was the next Allied target. He ordered 30,000 additional troops northward, constructing new coastal defenses that drained German resources from the Eastern Front. To the Allies, this diversion was priceless, an entire army held hostage by a few hundred men operating under the cover of midnight raids. Still, not everything about archery and anklet went according to plan. Several reconnaissance teams sent ashore ahead of the main landings vanished without a trace. They were small units, 2 or 3 men each, tasked with mapping German gun positions and marking safe landing zones. Their absence was quietly noted but never explained in official reports. Some historians believe they were captured and executed under Hitler's Commando order. Others suspect they disappeared into the Norwegian resistance network, identities erased for protection. Whatever their fate, their names rarely appear in surviving documents. A British naval communiqué, heavily redacted when released decades later, included one haunting line: certain forward parties did not rejoin main force, presumed successful in diversion. What diversion meant remains unknown. When the surviving commandos returned to Britain, the mood was mixed. Victory, yes, but also loss. For every man who came home, another was missing or buried beneath frozen rubble. Yet the message was clear: Britain's shadow war in Norway could strike at any moment, anywhere, and vanish like smoke on the sea. The raid's success solidified the commandos' reputation and inspired the formation of even more specialized units, from the special boat section to the covert X-craft submariners. Their next mission would take secrecy to its ultimate extreme, a silent approach beneath the waves toward the beaches of Normandy, where the fate of Europe itself would soon be decided. June 4, 1944. Beneath the gray swell of the English Channel, 2 tiny submarines moved silently toward the coast of Nazi-occupied France. Barely 50 feet long and crewed by only 4 men each, these X-class midget submarines were part of one of the most secret operations of the war, Operation Gambit. Their mission was unlike any commando raid that had come before. There would be no explosions, no gunfire, and no escape if discovered. Their job was to guide the largest amphibious invasion in history, D-Day, by slipping unseen to the Normandy beaches and marking the way for the Allied fleet. The crews of X-20 and X-23 were volunteers from the Royal Navy's elite 12th Submarine Flotilla, veterans of the earlier attacks on the Tirpitz in Norway's fjords. They were accustomed to darkness, silence, and the crushing confinement of steel tubes beneath the sea. Their orders were simple but perilous: navigate across 100 miles of enemy-patrolled waters, surface within a mile of the invasion beaches, and remain hidden for up to 48 hours before D-Day began. Once the invasion fleet approached, they would raise telescopic masts bearing signal lights and radar beacons to guide the assault waves directly to Sword and Juno beaches. Commander George Honor led X-23, bound for Sword Beach, while Lieutenant Kenneth Hudspeth commanded X-20, assigned to Juno. They departed from Portsmouth under cover of night, their movements masked even from most Allied commanders. Only a handful of men at Supreme Headquarters knew of their existence. If captured, their presence could expose the invasion's timing and location, a risk so severe that their mission was recorded only under Special Operations, Naval, with no further details. The Channel crossing was a test of endurance. The midget submarines, barely the size of a railway carriage, were tossed violently in the rough seas. Inside, temperatures dropped close to freezing, condensation dripped from the walls, and oxygen levels fell dangerously low. The men rotated through sleeping, navigating, and maintaining watch through the periscope, surviving on cold rations and nerves. When German patrol boats passed overhead, the engines were cut and all movement ceased. The silence was suffocating. We could hear the screws of the enemy ships like thunder, Lieutenant Hudspeth later recalled. It felt as though the sea itself was holding its breath. By the evening of June 5, both X-craft had reached their designated positions off the French coast. The Normandy shoreline lay quiet, shrouded in mist. The men anchored on the seabed, running silent. Through periscopes, they could just make out the dark shapes of German fortifications along the bluffs. They would spend the night waiting in absolute stillness, submerged just below the surface. Any movement, any sound could bring swift destruction. Then a storm struck. High winds and heavy seas battered the fragile vessels, threatening to drag them off station. 4 hours, the crews fought to maintain depth and heading, adjusting ballast by hand as the waves threatened to crush the craft or drive them into the sandbanks. Despite their isolation, they held firm. Above them, the invasion fleet was being delayed by the same tempest, Eisenhower's fateful decision to postpone D-Day by 24 hours spared the X-craft from certain discovery. Finally, at dawn on June 6, the largest armada ever assembled appeared on the horizon. From their tiny periscopes, the submariners saw an awe-inspiring sight. Thousands of ships stretching as far as the eye could see. At 5 o'clock, both crews surfaced, extended their telescopic beacons and activated their lights, coded blue and amber flashes invisible to the Germans but unmistakable to Allied navigation officers. The invasion force, guided by these silent sentinels, aligned perfectly with their target sectors. As the bombardment of Normandy began, X-20 and X-23 remained in position, enduring the thunder of artillery overhead. Through periscope lenses they watched the first landing craft hit the beaches. Smoke, fire, and chaos filled the morning air. They had completed their mission, unseen, unknown, and yet essential to the success of Operation Overlord. For 48 hours they remained on station, observing the progress of the invasion and transmitting coded reports on tidal patterns and beach conditions. When they finally slipped away on June 7, their role was still secret. The men returned to Portsmouth exhausted, dehydrated, and half-deaf from the pounding of nearby naval guns. Their story would not be told publicly for decades. Operation Gambit was a triumph of stealth, courage, and precision, a perfect fusion of naval ingenuity and commando discipline. It showed that victory in modern war did not always belong to the loudest guns or the largest armies, but to the silent professionals who risked everything in the shadows. Yet even here mystery lingers. Classified naval correspondents later hinted at an unplanned sighting off the French coast, an unidentified third X-craft detected briefly on sonar and never seen again. Some speculate it was a decoy, others an independent reconnaissance submarine that never returned. No wreck has ever been confirmed. As the Allies stormed ashore and the fate of Europe turned, the Commandos and their clandestine partners beneath the sea had fulfilled their purpose. They had operated unseen but decisive, the quiet hands that shaped D-Day. Their success marked the culmination of years of secret warfare, but even as France burned and victory loomed, Britain's covert war still held more secrets yet to be uncovered. The next and final chapter of this hidden struggle would not be measured in explosions or maps, but in memory, in the lingering questions about what was lost, what was hidden, and what was deliberately left buried in the fog of war. The war in Europe was drawing to its violent conclusion. By 1945, the world had witnessed the full scope of the Allied advance, from the beaches of Normandy to the ruins of Berlin. But beneath the thunder of tanks and bombers, another war had been fought, a shadow war, waged by men whose names rarely appeared in dispatches. They were the commandos, the saboteurs, the reconnaissance divers, and the intelligence gatherers who struck in silence. Their legacy, built from the ashes of missions like Claymore, Chariot, Archery, and Gambit, would shape the future of covert warfare for generations. Yet, many of their most daring operations remain locked away in classified archives, their full stories untold. As Allied soldiers liberated Europe, surviving commandos returned home to a nation that often did not know what they had done, or what they had sacrificed. Their records were sealed, their unit numbers erased, and their missions referred to only as special operations. Some men received medals years after the war. Others disappeared from official rosters entirely. The veil of secrecy that had once protected them now obscured their legacy. "We were ghosts," one veteran later said, "and ghosts don't make the front page." Operation Chariot survivors spent years piecing together what had really happened at St. Nazaire. Declassified fragments suggested that, alongside the demolition of the dry dock, a small intelligence detail was tasked with retrieving documents from a German naval headquarters in the port. Those papers, believed to include shipping codes and U-boat schedules, were never officially logged as recovered, yet Bletchley Park's sudden success in decrypting Atlantic signals weeks later remains unexplained. It was as if the intelligence they'd risked their lives to obtain had simply appeared from nowhere. Other mysteries persist. Reports of a missing team from Operation Archery resurfaced in 1952, when Norwegian fishermen discovered sealed canisters washed ashore near Malloy. Inside were rusted weapons, British ration tins, and a water-damaged notebook containing coordinates. MI6 operatives confiscated the find within hours, and the material was never publicly displayed. Some believe the men were scouting an early plan for what later became the Jedburgh missions, Allied agents inserted behind enemy lines to organize resistance. Others whisper that they were pursuing something even more sensitive, perhaps early intelligence on Germany's secret weapons program along the coast. Even Operation Gambit holds its secrets. In naval archives released in 1989, sonar logs from June 5, 1944, show a third unidentified contact moving parallel to X-20 and X-23. Its identity remains a mystery. No X-craft was reported missing that night, yet the blip appeared, moved purposefully toward shore, then vanished. Whether it was a German patrol, a decoy craft, or an unrecorded reconnaissance unit has never been proven. The sea, as always, keeps its secrets well. But beyond the mystery lies the human truth. These men were ordinary miners, clerks, farmhands, forged into extraordinary instruments of war. Their weapons were courage and silence. In the post-war years, many struggled to reintegrate, haunted by memories of missions they were forbidden to speak of. One commando officer, in a letter found decades later, wrote, "It was not the killing that stays with me, it was the quiet. The waiting in the dark, knowing you may never come back. And if you do, no one will ever know where you were." As the Cold War dawned, Britain's experience with the Commandos gave birth to new organizations: the Special Boat Service, the Special Air Service, and the Special Operations Executive's successors in intelligence and counterespionage. The skills honed in the fjords and harbors of occupied Europe became the blueprint for covert warfare in the modern era. Silent infiltration, sabotage, deception, these were now weapons of strategy as much as courage. Yet, even with decades of hindsight, the story of Britain's most secret commando raids is not complete. Many operational files remain redacted under the Official Secrets Act, their contents deemed too sensitive even now. Historians continue to debate the full extent of the Commandos' collaboration with intelligence agencies, especially regarding the collection of Enigma materials, coastal mapping for D-Day, and early reconnaissance of atomic research facilities in occupied France. Perhaps that is how it was meant to be. These missions were never designed for glory, only for necessity. They were fought not to be remembered, but to ensure victory. The men of Claymore, Chariot, Archery, Anklet, and Gambit operated in a world where silence was survival, and secrecy was the ultimate weapon. Today, memorials to their courage stand on windswept coasts and quiet harbors, in Norway and France, in the Scottish Highlands where they trained. The names carved in stone are few, but their echoes stretch across history. Each raid, each operation, was a thread in the vast web of deception and resistance that helped turn the tide of war. And so, the story closes as it began, in secrecy. The 5 most secret British commando raids of World War II remain both triumph and enigma. They reveal not just the bravery of the men who carried them out, but the depth of the hidden war they fought, one waged in whispers, shadows, and the unwavering conviction that freedom sometimes depends on those who are never seen.